And perhaps rarer still is when that possibility belongs to the group to whom that writer, as a white American, has come to recognize he owes the sum of his experience as a citizen. Well, part of what I intend to talk about today is how I gained a sense of that indebtedness to ADOS. I've also been asked to weigh in on the prevalence of its inverse. That is, why aren't more white people who profess a commitment to economic justice standing with ADOS in their bid for recognition as a uniquely disadvantaged group and in their attendant justice claim for reparations? The answer to the first question is simple. I merely had to listen. To listen with what Reverend Dr. Kevin Cosby often refers to as courageous ears. When William Faulkner was once asked to describe his writing process, he responded, quote, "It begins with a character, usually, and once he stands up on his feet and begins to move, all I can do is trot along behind him with a paper and pencil, trying to keep up long enough to put down what he says and does." From the very beginning, I have gone off in similar pursuit of the ADOS movement, convinced that it has just as much, if not arguably more, to tell white America about itself as it does actual ADOS. As for why more white people have yet to heed that message, I'm decidedly less sure. As literally no one seated in this sanctuary today needs reminding, the white American psyche is a puzzling thing. And I'm really not so sure that my lifelong membership to the group puts me at any kind of advantage in probing it for certain truths on why it bends in the especially mystifying way it does when the question becomes how we substantively address the group-specific damages stemming from and very much subsequent to chattel slavery. Indeed, if anything, insofar as my writing about ADOS over the past few years has afforded me a little distance from the white psyche, I've come to appreciate just how limited it is in its ability to think about whiteness in a way that can begin radically undoing all of the inequalities it has been made to contain. And what I wish to suggest today is that the only way of overcoming that dilemma is for a white person to bracket whatever skepticism he or she might have about being told something truly and profoundly unsettling about themselves and all that their experience as a white person in America entails. And to understand that the only way to really see whiteness for what it actually is to sincerely listen to the one group who has ever only existed outside of it. The group who, precisely because they've been shut out so completely, because they've been made to be set apart and to observe whiteness from a vantage point well beyond it, thus know it in its brutal and ill-gotten totality. That vantage belongs to ADOS and only them. It reveals a view of all that access to whiteness makes possible in the United States, of all that's derived from their group's deprivation and ruin, the chief proceed of which has always been wealth, that cornerstone of stability, that basic building block of mobility that we continue to go to flagrant lengths in order to ensure they as a group never realize. And I invite you, white people, to imagine your own capacity for restraint in such a scenario, where this fullness of possibility has always rested on your being denied it. And to then measure that against what ADOS has been made to endure for centuries. I invite you to to consider life from this place of thoroughgoing exclusion. And from there, speculate honestly on your ability to be patient for progress. To tolerate over and over again the tiring rehearsal of your liberation. Of entering into coalitions only to find that in the end, while your efforts have helped other marginalized groups secure a foothold in whiteness, your group itself remains conspicuously unmoved from the wretched terrain of its exclusion. Your group alone remains bound to that bottomland where all the failure and disadvantage goes that America has always needed to be diverted somewhere away from whiteness in order to make and preserve its meaning, its advantage, its normalcy. Your group abides where all that failure and disadvantage pools and collects. And imagine for a moment living with the knowledge of this awful truth, that while your ancestors gave their lives in defiance of being consigned to occupy that place, in defense of the belief that their exclusion would not be your inheritance, their martyrdom seems nonetheless to have amounted to an implausible and tragically outrageous thing. Merely the moral capital for everyone else's campaigns of inclusion. And these campaigns are ones in which your own persisting and obvious lack of incorporation into U.S. society seems to register at most an incidental concern. And while this cause or that cause might pay lip service to the severity of your group's plight, they in practice empty it of its core essential component, the imperative of advocating for targeted economic repair. As such, they proceed without ever really challenging what it's maybe starting to seem to you, and it seems only you, that inclusion in America is actually based on complicity in maintaining the state of your group's disrepair, a history of accumulated disadvantages that other groups can leverage to merge into American normalcy ahead of you, to then begin further contesting their place in the supremacy over you. I invite you, white people, to envision yourself naturally objecting to the ongoingness of this arrangement, only to then be given a stern lecture about how it's all the same struggle. A sharp talking to filled with palpable disdain that your desire to put forward an agenda of self-interest always elicits in your apparent allies. Allies whose quote-unquote solidarity is so conditional and subject to such rigid terms that deny your individuality and your experience, that it less resembles cooperative movement politics than it does an abusive relationship. At what point do you not really start to wonder about that? And how do you not begin hearing in it every confirmation that nothing will change, that the arrangement is the arrangement and it will be made to continue? I ask only that you seriously contemplate how long you feel you could possibly stomach this. How long do you personally feel you could subdue what would be your absolute burning awareness of those injustices, of everything that's been stolen from you and then openly displayed elsewhere, to be at everyone else's disposal except your own? And of course, you can't ever really do this. I can't, anyway. And it's not that I haven't spent a great deal of time trying to be extremely conscious of the terrible realities of ADOS life. It's not that I haven't tried to be very, very disciplined in understanding my life in relation to theirs. But I would submit that it is truly impossible for you or I, as non-ADOS, to ever really even come close to appreciating what the oppressiveness of that existence actually feels like. Of belonging to a group who day after week after month after year must navigate a constant series of barriers meant to affirm their membership in a caste. For all practical purposes, you and I, as non-ADOS, exist in an entirely alternate dimension of American life than the one they inhabit. Which is not to say that we shouldn't persist in trying, or that one will find little utility or occasion for personal betterment in the exercise of trying to imaginatively identify. The point is that such flings at empathy, however noble, are ultimately immaterial to the discussion of ADOS. Because it seems to me that it's much less about understanding our life in relation to theirs, and more about understanding our life as entirely shaped by theirs. About understanding the group to which we belong with all its social, economic, and political cachet as being an end product on the assembly line of ADOS disadvantage and their deliberate underdevelopment. And insofar as we profess to prize fairness and justice and healing commensurate with the hurt that has been inflicted on the ADOS community, then I would argue that everything, absolutely everything, depends on being able to make that leap from understanding our life in relation to understanding our life as shaped by. Because it is at that point, and only that point, that we begin to properly identify the true nature of our condition as white people, of what it really means to inhabit the benefits of whiteness in America. It is, at its root, a debt. And in this framework, the phrase, check your privilege, actually starts to mean something in how we as white people participate in bringing about meaningful justice for ADOS. Because that privilege of whiteness, in fact, corresponds to a definite and mounting sum of money. A sum payable to ADOS. Right. It is a measurable asset, one established with chattel slavery, and which ever since the U.S. government has held in a kind of living trust, apportioning and distributing it to whomever it deems eligible beneficiaries, and in doing everything it can to ensure that selection process operate on a principle of ADOS exclusion, that government has underwritten the consolidation of social, economic, and political capital within whiteness. It has facilitated the generational transferences of those sources of advantage and mobility, and so further consolidated them within whiteness. The result for ADOS is a gutting of possibility that is so total and so uniformly wrought throughout the group that they will perpetually occupy the bottom of society in the absence of a reparations package whose dollar amount figures in the trillions. That is not alarmist hysteria, that is simply math. And all this so that the whiteness we enjoy might prosper. to the rightful claimants of that debt is our empathy, our tortured senses of ourselves. What value to them is our hand-wringing reluctance in being a principal beneficiary in an economic system whose bounty is built off the theft from their group? And while we can and should talk about a world beyond a system that incentivizes and rewards the exploitation of any group, the idea that we as a country can help usher in a new paradigm of egalitarianism without first repairing ADOS is one that is utterly at odds with that vision's fulfillment. For all the lofty pronouncements about the impossibility of reparations, what's truly lofty is that there isn't a basic, inevitable component to our progress as a nation that will require a stark and wincingly honest reckoning with how we put to right our ill-gained inheritance as white people. We cannot, in declining to act for economic justice, specifically for ADOS, simply shunt the curse of that long dereliction onto our children. The work of repair must begin now, must begin to be laid by us, and must be conceived as a multi-generational project of justice, guided and governed not by a sense of empathy alone, but more importantly, the knowledge that it is a debt. One which, until the balance is discharged, will find each new generation every bit as answerable for the abuses inflicted on the ADOS community as were the slaveholders themselves. Opponents of reparations say that we can't live in the past. Well, that declaration mistakes the nature of our past, absolutely. Because to exist in a pre-reparations America is to naturally invite the past to dwell in us. Doesn't matter whether you feel personally responsible. It doesn't matter whether your ancestors came here after slavery. What is after slavery? There is no after slavery. With an event of such massive economic consequence and unique legacy in America, there is only before and after reparations. White allies of ADOS, present and would-be, we are called today to help cross that divide. We are called to repair.
Today, I got a couple of announcements while they set up the panel. They're going to set up a panel. It's going to take about 5 minutes to set up the panel, so don't just leave the room. Let me see. So we've had people all across the world listening to this. I want to get some countries that people have live streamed from. Of course, America, the UK, Virgin Islands, United Arab Emirates, Germany, France, Italy, Canada. We got our allies, Senegal, Switzerland, Puerto Rico, Japan, Costa Rica, Bermuda. So we've had people all across the country. I wanted to tell you guys there's still 44 more shirts available. The ADOS policies in the exchange, not a gift. Those are available outside. I know they told you guys to be sold out, but They have 44 more large and extra large. Next, at 5:30, there will be a meet and greet on the field with the Simmons Band performing under the tent. They're going to have 3 food trucks: Cleon's Barbecue, Mama's Mama Kitchen, and Boss Hog Bar. These are black kids support our people. That's what they named it. Shout out to all these. Keep your armbands, please. Don't sell them on eBay. You do need to wear them to enter the building tomorrow. And lastly, we're going to have scheduled at 2 o'clock tomorrow a tour of Simmons College of Kentucky. If you would like to take part in that, it'll be at 2 o'clock tomorrow. The address is 1000 South 4th Street. You have to be there at 2 o'clock. Again, 1000 South 4th Street. 2 o'clock to tour the Simmons HBCU campus. Thank you. Tomorrow.
Well, we're going to go ahead and begin. We just want to conclude what has been a stellar day. Come on, give it up. It has been a stellar day. We want to place 2 bookmarks. I would like to put 2 bookmarks before us before we begin our time of discussion. This whole movement for reparations began as General Sherman did his famous march toward the sea with thousands of our ancestors following in behind him. Special Order 15 was given that lands would be confiscated and former slave owners given to newly freed slaves. And he left it up to Congress to award them the official titles for the land. And therein lied the mistake, because Congress did not support the special order. Lands that were confiscated and given to African Americans were then taken away from them. And then when King stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and told the country that we had been given a bad check, I believe ADOS has called forth a similar moment where we are letting the nation know that what was promised, what was given, that was bad, will not be allowed. And we have come to take what is ours and to make demands that justice be done for the American descendants of slavery. And we have a stellar panel with us who are going to help us to just go over some of the things that we've talked about. We're going to answer some questions. but we want to begin with Josh Poe, who is a member of the Simmons team and does outstanding work in the area of redlining. And so, Josh, we're going to begin with you. Then we're going to take some questions and just talk specifically about the mandate for reparations. Josh, glad to have you with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here. A lot of people already know my work here, but I'm a housing justice activist, geographer, and city planner, and was I was part of a group of people that started researching redlining around 2012, 2013, actually unearthing the historical maps. And if you paid attention to that, one of the things that's happened is the work around redlining has been historicized to a certain point, and some of the researchers have really done a disservice to actually contextualizing what redlining actually was and what it actually is. And so when I talk about redlining, I'm really talking about racial capitalism. I'm talking about what happened in 1924 with the federal government making black bodies a contagion to wealth creation, a detriment to property values, and then locking people out of the ability to accumulate capital. So everything that Zarina talked about today that's happening with gentrification is still a form of redlining. It's still a form of racial capitalism, and it's a form of racial banishment. And that's the language that I use to describe it. And I spend a lot of time in front of wealthy white philanthropists talking about these things. And what happens in those conversations is you sort of realize that you get so far into philanthropy that the people who could, who are in a position to fund solutions are so complicit in the problem that you can't get to any solution. So through years of just mapping census data and sort of thinking about ways out of this, I came to the conclusion sort of around 2014, 2015 that there's no way out of this without a massive redistribution of wealth. Right? So if we think about Louisville, and my work has become very hyper-local. My grandfather was a farmer, and he always said, like, pay attention, study your own farm, and then, and then get with other farmers, and you can share information. So in West Louisville, which is, the black area of Louisville, 75% of all the black people in Jefferson County live on less than 5% of the land, which is West Louisville. So that's a form of racial banishment. That's a form of isolation. The median income in West Louisville is about $22,000 a year. Right? So we actually had a meeting with the mayor and his staff last week and really tried to contextualize that and what that meant, because we're trying to shift housing subsidies to the lowest income people to stop the massive increases in homelessness that we're getting ready to have. And what the mayor and his staff said is well, we can't build homeless shelters. And for me, I didn't realize just how unaware and how callous our public officials are to the problems of poor black people in our city. Right? And how the narratives around actual black income in our city are so erased that we have a narrative that we can just build wealth through homeownership, but you can't purchase a home if you make $22,000 a year. So there's a group. So at the same time, and this is all functioning sort of in this neoliberal landscape, right? So if we think about public housing, in 1978, the HUD budget for public housing was $83 billion. By 1983, it's $18 billion. By 1993, it's zero. So we destroyed public housing through starving out public funding, right? At the same time, in 1993, the World Bank publishes a report called Housing, Enabling Markets to Work. And that was a neoliberal program to take public subsidies and mobilize them for the private sector. So we're giving land in black communities over to private developers, right? And what you have in that setting are territorial regimes of private control. And police function differently in that sort of landscape, and NGOs function differently in that sort of landscape. And as we move to this neoliberal concept, you sort of have to ask yourself, what is the role of poor black people in that situation? So there's a lot of money being made by NGOs right now in that situation. And I think we need to really sort of call out some of these problematic NGOs as a form of soft power, as a form of counterinsurgency to pacify people and really quell the dissent around what's happening. So in thinking about reparations, when we work with young people, we're teaching young people how to do investigations. We're teaching young people how to investigate developers. We're teaching young people how to investigate real estate scams. We're teaching young people how to file Freedom of Information Act over land that's being given to private developers. But one thing I ask young people is always think about how your narrative can be co-opted and develop strategies to prevent that from being co-opted. Because we see that a lot with Yvette, but in the way Yvette and Antonio describe reparations, and then there's this sort of softer language around it that's not actually reparations, right? So I don't know if anybody was here when the mayor gave his speech today. This morning he talked about a program called Lean Into Louisville, right? Lean Into Louisville is a program to educate people about historic discrimination, and it consists of public art, talking circles, and community conversations. That happened to response some work that myself and activists were doing around having real authentic conversations about redistributing wealth in the city, right? So there's always counter narratives that pop up around these topics that really lack substance, that really lack any authenticity, but they service this sort of moral redemption for white supremacy in discussing systemic oppression. So, in thinking about that, I want to connect and challenge people here. When you go back to your cities, file those Freedom of Information Act requests. Find out what developers are getting free land in your cities. Find out how NGOs are getting public subsidies in your cities. Find out, expose the real estate scams. Expose how a lot of those developers have code violations in black neighborhoods, and elevate those things and try to shut that down and lift the lid off of it to sort of stop the bleeding while political organizing is done to push for reparations at a different level.
Thank you, Josh. We are so fortunate here at the ADOS conference to have a brain trust like this gathered together. And what we want to do is we want to maximize the time that we have them. So we're not going to take questions from the audience, but we have a ton of questions that have already been turned in. And I will just pose those questions to the panelists. They'll be able to respond. And that'll give them an opportunity to address a lot of different questions. And I'm going to begin with a question to Yvette. The question is this: do you think and believe that taking money from liberal donors is a good idea?
Liberal white donors or just liberal donors? This is liberal donors.
I'm assuming.
Oh, okay. It becomes a problem, and it exposes a problem at the same time. It exposes a problem because we should be able to take money from our own group and be okay, and not have to do that. And so it exposes the lack of wealth. And the other problem that it has is, and that's why Antonio and I always talk about we haven't taken money from anybody, is that this sort of movement that we're doing can only be led by free black people.
Right.
It can only be led by ADOS people that are free from the puppet strings. And no money is free. All money costs you something. When Antonio was talking about Comcast, that's the reason that we can't get our black organizations that are supposed to represent us because Comcast is paying them to shut up. So if somebody's paying you to shut up and I don't have any money to give you, even though you're supposed to represent me, you don't represent me because somebody else is paying all your bills.
You're on the Urban League board.
Yep, on the board, and that's why you're on the board. You're on the board to pay bills. So what happens if all the money comes from, I'm not saying you can't get money. I'm not saying that like any other organization, regardless of what organization it is, because we don't have money, so you have to get money, a lot of people from somewhere else. I'm not saying that. I'm not criticizing anybody who does. I'm just saying that it takes a really smooth person to be able to maintain who they are. And that's kind of why I respect Dr. Cosby so much. Because he's been able to maintain a black church, a black institution, be black-led and unapologetically ADOS, and still be able to navigate within those circles, but still as a free person. I'm telling you, I don't see that every day. Most of the time, you just bought and paid for. I don't see that. And so, for me, in terms of my space, I'm at a space right now where I don't have to do that I can be just, because I'm just YouTube, I'm not running an institution, I'm not feeding black people, right? I'm feeding you spiritually, but I don't have to put food on I'm not putting food on your plate right now. Like this is advocacy, this is a political thing. So I think you have to be very careful because all money has a cost. And people are going to show up for it. People are going to show up for what they want.
Thank you. Antonio, how can we present ADOS position to the youth that believes in crystals and spells to create a bridge and make the idea popular to them, since this is what drives their interests?
So, as you guys all know, I coined the term the decadent veil. What that describes is the fact that we believe black celebrity presents some kind of alternate universe where black folks got reparations. What this question goes to when he talks about spells is the spell of the decadent veil. It is the belief that Jay-Z is a billionaire that controls and owns himself in the same way that Byron is. And I guess what we have to do is awaken everybody to the reality of what is a billionaire, of what is money, of what is blackness. And I think that's starting to happen now, is this informational campaign that confronts race for black folks and white folks. See, a lot of black folks knew they was brown, knew they was living in ghettos, but before Breaking Brown, Tone Talks, and ADOS, didn't know that they were shut out. I mean, the degree of it. So I believe one of the things you got to do with spells and magic is show some reality. I've been watching movies, and sometimes they use a little fire, and that heat gets Indiana Jones out of his magic. Well, the heat is the reality of you driving Uber in Louisville at the ADOS conference. The heat is the reality of what 2.6% of the wealth actually buys. And I think that reality, that informational campaign is part of how we do it.
Thank you. Dr. Cosby, your question is this. I am 13 years old. My question is, how would this talk about our topics we have talked about and are going to talk about play a part in schools that are black and the true history from us as ADOS kids? I'm asking on behalf of my friends and myself. So thinking about how to bring this conversation into schools.
I think it's incumbent upon our elected school board representatives to make sure that that American history has been dipped in chocolate, and that the true story of the American experience is taking place. Also, I think that one of the roles of black institutions is to unapologetically teach our story. I think that when most people think about Sunday school, for example, historically, Sunday school started because black people wanted to be literate. In 1865, only 5% of the 4 million slaves were literate. By 1915, 50 years later, 75% of them were literate. And they were able to increase their literacy because their churches taught practical skills, taught people how to read and write. And I think that we have to rethink what we do on Sunday, for example, in terms of our Sunday school classes. And I think that we have to develop a liberation theology, a black theology that is not dependent upon the culture to educate our people, but we got to do it in our churches, in our institutions.
So a follow-up to that, so you're suggesting that the other black institutions, some of which you mentioned in your presentation, like black media, black family, as well as black churches, take more of a leadership role in educating as well as educating in the public school system?
3 C's: consciousness, concerns, controls. It is the primary purpose of black institutions to infuse consciousness in black people. So it's inexcusable. You just don't know what you don't know. But when you've got someone like Yvette and Tone and we're listening in, then we got to find a way to incorporate this into our institutions and to make, for example, the curriculum of our Sunday schools reflect the concerns of ADOS.
Right.
Thank you. Josh, a question for you. Who do you believe is most confused about racism and white supremacy? White people or black, non-white people? And it's black. A little provocative question. Who do you believe is most confused about racism and white supremacy? White people or black people?
Well, there's some generalizations there, right? So I think there are some big differences with white people in terms of class and geography. So I don't think white wealthy people are really confused at all. And I think that's really the problem. I don't think the billionaire class is confused. I don't think the ownership class is confused. I think poor white people might be confused because I think they've been duped for a long time. And I think that was built into capitalism. I don't think capitalism exists without racism. I think you have to have racism to justify capitalism because you have to have low wages. And I think poor white people have sort of been convinced, really through the invention of whiteness, that they are superior. It's what Du Bois called a mental wage, right? So that broke down solidarity between those two groups. So I think they're very confused. But I don't think among wealthy white people, I don't think they're confused at all. I think what you have with the white middle class and white upper middle class is sort of what Toni Morrison talked about, that they need white supremacy, right? When she did that interview with Charlie Rose, she said, "Are you any good at what you do? What are you without white supremacy, right? Are you good?"
Right.
You know, and I think that's the question a lot of mediocre white people need to ask themselves, like, are you comfortable just floating on the sea of unearned privilege or unearned wealth? Or are you willing to step outside that and really stand next to somebody based on your skills and your merit? And that's
Could you add one more component to that? Because what I've found is when I'm educating in white spaces about the role of Christianity in sustaining enslavement and racism, that they have been intentionally miseducated and not taught things, and in their ignorance, then the system sustains itself. Do you see that when you're doing that?
I think it's a cop-out. I think white fragility is in service to white supremacy. So when you tell white people, I spend a lot of time telling white people things they don't want to hear, and there's a lot of pearl clutching that goes on in those spaces. But we have to realize that is a functionality of white supremacy. That's a form of soft power, right? And we have to call that out as soft power. And that white fragility can spread so quickly. It's like a flame if you give it oxygen. You know, all of a sudden you're talking about systemic racism, and now you have to console someone because they're crying in the corner. So it's a way of shifting the focus away from. So I don't ever want to be a part of elevating someone else's discomfort over another group's oppression. So I think we have to handle that in a very strategic way.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to do one more round of questions, and we're going to begin with Yvette. Voting down the ballot as a Democrat will possibly put them in power in the Senate and Congress. There's a but here. But why should we vote them in those seats when they wield the power to pass votes to give illegal rights to vote, just like the House passed the law a few months back to give illegals the right to obtain a driver's license in their state, because we're still under his gavel, the gavel of Nancy Pelosi.
I think you have to look When I say down ballot, what I'm talking about is voting down ballot Democrat. Somebody's asking if I understand you right. Well, you're still going to give Nancy Pelosi the gavel. Like you're still helping her. This is where I think you have to become very much involved in your local politics. Not all politics are the same. So if you're looking at a local politician, if you're looking at your lawmaker, and your lawmaker is doing a lot of stuff that you disagree with, and it's like, you know how we saw the video where we have JD chasing people? If that's your lawmaker, and if your lawmaker is behaving that way, then okay, no, you don't do it. You don't do it. Then you go further down. Right. Your state lawmaker, you go all of them. You can't just see. Here's the thing, and this is why when I say this is why I don't believe in Messiah leadership. I'm not telling you, because Nancy Pelosi ain't doing anything for all the blacks in San Francisco who have been locked out of housing. You want to get over here and just tell me that all we got to do is just take care of Trump. We don't have to take care of a black agenda, an ADOS agenda. Right. You have to look at your individual lawmaker. You have to look at who you're voting for. You know enough. We know enough. We know enough. We've been doing enough political education to know whether our lawmaker, whatever state you're in, and if you don't know enough, now's the time to do it. But you have enough to make an assessment of that person and decide whether or not that person has an ADOS agenda, to decide whether or not that person, when we watched that video, we saw Beto O'Rourke at least engage, and his staff allowed him to engage. We saw Kamala just run and jump in the back of the truck and then yell something out. No. We all have, but what about the bill? Just slam it over. What's that? So we know enough to know that we know how to make assessments. So when it comes time to look at who you're sending, I'm not telling you got to necessarily vote for that person. I'm just giving you a framework. When you look at that person and you see somebody who's running scared from our issues, or telling us they're not going to do anything, or they're not involved, or it doesn't matter, or it does not come to this conference, or it's not going to matter this turnaround, or like Ben Jones, you got to take one for the team, and maybe you get the next go round. If that is your lawmaker, then I don't think you can vote for that person. But you have to make that assessment. You have to. Georgia is not California, is not New York, is not Michigan, is not Wisconsin, is not Idaho. That's where doing political education comes into play, and being able to make that assessment of that lawmaker, look at what their budget is, and look at their demographic. If your demographic is mostly ADOS and mostly ADOS issues, and you see that person on the news, on the Twitter feed, advocating a whole bunch of stuff that ain't got nothing to do with you, and then you show up and advocate, and they say, we're gonna talk about it. We saw how Terry Sewell did with the hookworm. Black people in Alabama living in third world conditions, and all she's talking about is DACA this, DACA that, and standing beside Nancy Pelosi for the camera. You have to be able to make that individual assessment of your lawmaker. Because we all have to be able to sleep at night, and we all have to be able to know that we're going to take care of our families and do what we're doing politically. You have to make that assessment. And you can get together with your breaking ground chapter and make that assessment together, and show up at the office and make appointments together. But I'm not telling that you got to vote for that person. I'm absolutely not saying that.
Thank you, Rebecca. Next question. I know you've heard the argument that says if black people get money, the money will immediately go to Cadillacs, chicken sandwiches. When we really need to buy, what we really need to buy is economic, cultural, historical, physical health for our ADOS people. How will a feasible reparations plan accomplish this and avoid the pitfalls of miseducated spending? So let me focus. Must there be dedicated phases of emotional and intellectual healing before disbursement of funds in general? It's a lot there.
No, I mean, the core thematic of that question is flawed.
Yeah, right.
Now, I did a report with Professor Sandy Darity, who's watching now. What's up, Darity? He couldn't be here. Essentially, what we get wrong about closing the racial wealth gap. It got shared around, everybody from Roland Martin to Mark, I believe Al Sharpton was on stage with printed copies, talking. They know what they're talking about, though. And I say this to the question, which is, we haven't spent our money on chicken and Cadillacs when we ain't had no money. I say this to the question that when you look at the mythology around home ownership, we forget that you need money to buy a home. It isn't the fact that once we get these homes, all of a sudden they become less valuable because we're inside of them. Until you deconstruct and reconstruct race, until you protect the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and make it work for black people the way it was supposed to work for black people, because it was forgotten for all these years. It was there, but it wasn't being used to open the doorways for us as it was meant to. So I say this to that question, that it poses a false narrative about black folks that we don't know how to spend money. That I can't give Dr. Cosby $1 million without strings without him going out and getting some gold tipped shoes. But I'll tell you this, what Dr. Cosby did with this conference, what Dr. Cosby did with this conference puts to bed that mythology. When you look at this conference, and I want to take a moment, I'm sorry, because I'm going to do this. When you look at this man here, please stand over. His staff, his church, like, take for instance this sanctuary. In 30 years, no one has ever eaten in this sanctuary. If we had 1,700 people, he was going to let y'all eat in this sanctuary for the first time ever, but we didn't have to do that. So I'm saying this to say, what we see is that you can give us money without strings, and we will not use the money wrong. We're going to use it to throw the ADOS. So my answer to that question, I guess, ultimately is that reparations, as it's framed in that question, does a disrespect to reparations. When you understand what I'm talking about, I'm talking about a transformation of society, not money. Right. The only reason I'm talking about money is to make it and put it in a framework where you can kind of grasp it. But what it is a transition of a black underclass to an elite status. It's taking a group that has been designated as the bottom and bringing them to the top, and you figure out how that works. Now, I'll tell you right now, ain't no whatever Yarmouth was talking about is going to do it. I'll tell you now that $400 billion is not going to do that. What does it is trillions of dollars, only because the only way you get there is transformative government. The only way we can get trillions of dollars to be given to a group that literally is worth billions of dollars, is by giving them ownership in things. See, that's what they don't want to deal with. So even when Mary Ann says, well, I need to do what's politically feasible, well, that's not reparations. See, for you to give us $7-8 trillion, it would require you to give us land. It would require you to give us telecommunications. You can't spend telecommunications on chicken and Cadillacs.
Thank you, Antonio. Dr. Cosby, your question is, how can we win allies among other blacks that are not ADOS?
How can we
win allies among other blacks that aren't on board with ADOS?
Well, I think that my sister, this brilliant Serena, is a prime example. She's the answer to that question. I think that we have to continue to challenge them not to engage in identity theft. In the Bible, the book of Matthew opens up with lineage.
Come on now.
It opens up with the genealogy of Jesus, tracing him through David all the way to Abraham.
Amen.
And his legitimacy is through his lineage. That's biblical. Our legitimacy is through our lineage. And I think that the best way that we can develop partners is, first of all, I think that we have to partner among ourselves first. And then as a result of partnering among ourselves, I think then that we have to continue to challenge people who look like us. As I said earlier, who have our pigmentation but don't have our identification.
Come on now.
And the true test, if they're going to be our allies and help us to advance our unique justice claims, and as Tone and Yvette have said, and when it's time for them to advance their justice claims against the colonial powers that oppress them, then we will be their allies and not try to steal what rightfully belongs to them.
Thank you. Last question for Josh. What book can you recommend to white people so that they can see with their own eyes that government has fully sponsored their achievements?
Well, it's going to take more than one book.
Books.
A book I don't recommend is The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. I think more books are coming out by people who did more of a deep dive into that research. I would say Cedric Robinson, but that's probably too radical. The book I go back to a lot is The Color of Money by Mercer Bergeron. I think with really framing the terms, really framing like the economic implications of white supremacy. I think that's the book I go to. Of course, Martin Luther King Jr. Where do we go from here? There are a lot of books, but the one that I recommend right now is Mercer Bergeron's book. But going back to this question of education, because we have to be careful how we identify our theories of change. And so a lot of times, and I've been through this space, I thought for a lot of times for a long time that this was a question of white people just not knowing. And then we would get with white people and without explaining things to them, but they didn't do anything different, right? So J.P. Morgan came to town last year and gave a $3 million donation to the city of Louisville, to nonprofits here, for financial literacy programs in West Louisville. And it's amazing how much money J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo are pumping into black neighborhoods right now, all based around financial literacy classes, right? So their theory of change is that black people don't know how to manage the 3 pennies that they have, right? So there's a problem there, but how much, Antonio, how much money is Jamie Dimon worth? Jamie Dimon, CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase? At least $30 billion, right? So they come to town and make a $3 million donation, and we're celebrating that. Like, that's a big deal. We've got data that shows that strong HBCUs increase black earnings. Simmons College didn't get a dime of that $3 million. It all went to white-led organizations, mostly around individual level impact around financial literacy. So it's going to take building power to really change the way philanthropic dollars flow in and out. It's going to take a lot more than just educating people like Jamie Dimon. And if we were able to educate Jamie Dimon today that we need reparations, the board would just replace him tomorrow. So it's going to take a lot more. It's going to take building political, like Yvette said, it's going to take political organizing on a large scale.
Thank you. As we conclude, I would like for us to recognize and celebrate Antonio, Yvette, and Dr. Cosby before we clap, for creativity and courage. Because they bring the best of their mind, their heart, what the biblical tradition calls pathos. It's that inner fire that drives you. And in a time where leaders are feeling so much pressure to sit down and to be quiet and to hide and to cower in fear, you all are relentless and courageous. Thank you all for your leadership for this movement. Come on, let's not do it.
We out of here, that the meet and greet is under the tent on the field across the street. Right over there? Yep, right there. Also, do not forget, as Antonio said, there are shirts, like 40 shirts for sale still. Keep your wristband for tomorrow, so do not lose that. Keep that, please. And is there anything else?